22 minutes after 4 o'clock, I'm Nana Akua. We are the People's Channel. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. It's time now for the Great British Debate this hour. I'm asking, does Britain need to prioritise spending on defence? US Navy Secretary Carlos Del Toro has suggested that Britain should re-evaluate the size of its armed forces in response to the crisis in the Middle East and threats from Russia and China. Now, he emphasised the importance of the UK investing more in its navy and reinforcing the army, especially in the face of current global threats, while the UK and the US are currently engaged in a bombing campaign against the Houthis in Yemen. And to be fair, it's in response to the Houthis firing at them. Del Toro indicated that there was no immediate need for Britain to increase its contribution. And all of this, of course, comes as the head of the British Army recently warned that it is too small to fight an all-out war without conscription, prompting discussions about the need for a reassessment of the UK's military capabilities and spending priorities. So, for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, does Britain need to prioritise spending on defence? Well, I'm joined now by Simon Danchuk, former Labour MP, Gary Mond, chairman of the National Jewish Assembly, Roger Gewald, former advisor to the UK Treasury, and James Marlowe, foreign affairs and defence analyst. OK, well, I'm going to come straight to you, James Marlowe. What are your thoughts?
Well, one of the ways to obtain the money which we desperately need in this country is to look at where some of the money is going to overseas. And one of those organisations is the United Nations Works and Relief Agency, which of course was set up, its first operational in May 1950, and it was the objective clearly was actually to look at the Palestinian refugees, and the United Nations reckoned that there was about 650,000 of them that fled after the 1948 war. And this United Nations relief organisation, its objective was to keep them as refugees, specifically in the Gaza. Now, let me just give you a couple of examples. For example, right now we're hearing quite a lot of the Jabalia refugee camp, and there are several others. These Palestinians are born in Gaza, and yet they're still known as refugees. The original 650,000 refugees many of them are no longer with us, but it's their sons, their grandsons. That goes on for eight
so what's
generations.
Your point, James, though? Can you make your point?
The point is that is where, because Britain, America, France, but we're specifically talking about Britain. Britain gives millions and millions per year to this organisation. And it's simply just perpetuating the actual problem of Palestinian refugees. So that is one way that you can actually grab back that money, and that is the starter. And just, if I can just finish the point on the United Nations UNRWA organisation, that this is going to be a way to actually slowly start to disembark from this organisation, because it is there specifically to keep Palestinian refugees and as a weapon against Israel. So that's one way that you can get back some money.
Some people might argue that putting money into those places actually sort of helps those areas and stops the mass migration of people to this country and all those sort of things. Some people might argue that money needs to be there. But ultimately, should they be prioritising defence, James? If you could just say yes or no so I could move on.
Well, yes, you should be prioritising defence, yes, but you need that money, and that's one of the places where you can get the money from.
Roger Gewald.
I think there are 2 points. I think we can all see very clearly what cuts do if we look at the NHS, police and crime, education, etc. I think the defense cuts, reducing our military to 1/2 of where it should be, according to the experts who've spoken recently, was a mistake. And I think it needs to be beefed up as soon as possible. I don't know about conscription. The second point is, I've just come back from the States where I spoke with President Trump and a number of his people. I didn't get to meet Biden, but I spoke with his people. And in them, I spoke to some very top geopolitical experts, and both sides, they all agree now that Putin is behind all of this. He's pulling the strings with Iran, he's pulling the strings with China, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the rest, and we're not even sure what their playbook is. The attacks that we're making in retaliation to the Houthis are, said these experts, exactly what they want us to do. It's pretty scary stuff. So yes, I think we need to beef up our military as quickly as possible.
All right. Gary Mond.
I completely agree. I was horrified to read that the Royal Navy lacked the missiles to fire against the Houthis on land in Yemen. And if we can't do that, we become a joke internationally. To actually have major warships in the Red Sea which lack the firepower. We need to spend a lot more on defence, without a doubt, not just for now, but going forward. And we need, as James Marlowe was saying at the start, to look at areas where we should cut on spending. And for me, net zero is one of the main areas. When Keir Starmer's talking about £28 billion, James was talking about millions. I would be talking about billions.
Simon Janchuk.
Yes, we need to increase defence spending, especially at this time. Everybody agrees that the world is a more dangerous place, whether it's the Red Sea and the Houthi terrorists there, whether it's the Middle East, Ukraine situation, China and Taiwan. The world is becoming increasingly it's difficult, and so we need a much stronger defence force. And I think we spend about 2.25% GDP at the moment. That has to get up to 3% of GDP if we're going to be able to defend ourselves effectively.
Well, I think it's currently 2.3% of GDP at the moment. But in the 80s, we were spending over 5% of our GDP, 5.5% actually in 1984, which is considerable. But if you look at other countries like Norway and also Sweden, who actually have got a compulsory national service, they only spend about 2.1% and 2.3% respectively. So it is quite interesting. Do you think that perhaps there's a case for us to bring back things like national service? Because I've been saying that, I've been touting it all along. James Marlowe, do you think that we should maybe bring back national service?
I heard a report when I was driving in over here on one of the radio stations that had actually said that I think it was 40 or 45% of people would refuse to do national service if indeed the government implemented that. So the general feeling is that the government will not implement that no matter what government comes into power in the future. But nevertheless, there is a good argument to say not just to join the army and fight for Britain, but actually it's good discipline to learn some basic skills. You can get that from the army, where we see that a lot of young people today seem to learn all their skills from TikTok and other places like that, and that's not the place where you're actually going to be able to develop yourself. Your self-development.
It's terrible, but you know, because all this anti-Semitism that we've been seeing on TikTok, there's all these from the river to the sea, as if they're doing some sort of dance, and it's like, hang on, this is serious. So a lot of people don't know what they're talking about looking through TikTok, so it's not the best place. Roger Giewoldt, what do you think? Do you think perhaps there's a place for national service, even though apparently 45% of the people wouldn't do it?
Yes, I think there well could be in the future. As somebody said on another program I was on GB News yesterday, our parents fought in the war. This generation has been fortunate in that, sure, there have been skirmishes and small wars all over the place, but nothing like what our parents lived through. And our kids might have to fight again. So the last thing we want to do is be unprepared. There has to be perhaps some sort of conscription if this escalates to a certain point in the near future. And yeah, there has to be some way to bring in some of that 45%. But we've got to beef up our military, yes.
Yeah. So in terms of, briefly, Gary, because we're running out of time. So, Gary, a lot of people would argue that, say, more money should go to the NHS or other things rather than national service and military things. What would you say to that?
National service should never have been stopped in the first place. How is this country going to react when possibly later this year, Javier Milei, the new president of Argentina, decides to reinvade the Falklands?
Well, he might not. You don't know whether he will or not.
You don't know he will not, but
He might not.
He's certainly very nationalistic in that regard.
And Simon Danchuk.
Yeah, I've always been a supporter of conscription, actually. I think you can devise a really smart approach which allows young people to either go into the military or to go into voluntary service, spend 12 months or 2 years, 18 months doing conscription, and I think that would be for the benefit of the country, actually.
Would you make it compulsory?
Well, I would make it compulsory. We have to re-establish patriotism in this country. We have to build pride back into this country, and I think it would be a significant part of doing that.
All right, so I'm going to ask you two questions then. So the first one is, Simon Danchuk, should we prioritise defence, and would you make national service compulsory?
Yes, yes.
For both. Gary Mon, same question.
Yes and yes.
Yes and yes, crikey. Roger Giewoldt, same to you.
Yes and yes.
Wow. James Marlowe.
Well, therefore, I have to say yes and yes.
Yeah. Oh, some people would say no, but nobody on this panel. But what do you think at home? Maybe somebody at home thinks it's a no and no. gbviews@gbnews.com. Tweet me now. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much, Simon Danchuk, Gary Mond, Roger Keyboard and James Marlowe.